The sun was just beginning to rise as Michael adjusted his tie in front of the mirror. His reflection looked nervous, as it often did before a big day at work. The stakes felt higher lately. His new job at Dawson Enterprises was both a blessing and a challenge, demanding long hours and a steep learning curve. "You'll do great," Emily said from behind him, slipping her arms around his waist. "You always do." Her smile was radiant, reassuring him as she always had. Emily had been his rock through the job hunt, celebrating with him when he landed the position. Every morning since he started, she'd insisted on walking him to work, a gesture he found sweet and supportive. "Thanks," Michael said, kissing her on the forehead. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The streets were alive with the bustle of the morning commute as they strolled hand in hand toward Dawson Enterprises. Michael felt lighter whenever Emily was with him. Her optimism seemed to shield him from the pressure of the job, at least temporarily. "So, what's on the agenda today?" Emily asked. "More meetings than I can count," Michael replied with a wry smile. "And I've got to present our team's progress to David." Emily's expression flickered at the mention of David Dawson, Michael's boss and the CEO of the company. "How's that going?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "He's tough, but fair," Michael said. "I think he respects my work, even if he doesn't show it much." "That's great," Emily said, her smile returning. "I'm proud of you." As they approached the sleek glass building, David himself stepped outside. His tailored suit and confident stride exuded authority. He was everything Michael wasn't: commanding, charismatic, and intimidating. "Good morning, Michael," David said, his gaze briefly flicking to Emily. "And who might this be?" Michael introduced Emily, and she extended her hand, her smile warm. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Dawson. Michael speaks very highly of you." David's smile was charming, almost disarming. "The pleasure is mine, Emily." "I see where Michael gets his motivation." Michael laughed nervously, feeling a pang of insecurity in David's commanding presence. Emily lingered a moment longer before saying goodbye, giving Michael a quick kiss on the cheek. "Have a great day," she said before turning to leave. Or so Michael thought. As Michael disappeared into the building, Emily waited around the corner, her heart pounding. She glanced over her shoulder, ensuring no one was watching, and then slipped back into the lobby. The receptionist barely noticed her as she took the elevator to the executive floor. David's office was at the end of a long, marble-lined hallway. Emily's heels clicked against the polished floor, the sound unnervingly loud in the empty corridor. She opened the door to find David seated at his desk, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "Right on time," he said, standing to greet her. Emily closed the door behind her, her pulse racing. "You made it clear I shouldn't be late." David chuckled, stepping closer. "I like punctuality. It's one of the many reasons I enjoy our little arrangements." Emily swallowed hard, guilt gnawing at her as David leaned in. But as his hand brushed her cheek, the guilt faded into something else entirely. Downstairs, Michael was immersed in his tasks. The day had barely started, yet the pressure was already mounting. He knew David's expectations were high, and he was determined to meet them. As he prepared for his morning presentation, he noticed Sarah, a colleague from his team, watching him intently. "Something on your mind, Sarah?" Michael asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, nothing. Just, good luck with the presentation." Michael nodded, but her expression lingered in his mind. Sarah had always been friendly, but lately, she'd seemed distant, even wary. He chalked it up to workplace stress and refocused on his tasks. Emily left David's office an hour later, her hair slightly disheveled and her lipstick smudged. She straightened her blouse as she stepped into the elevator, her mind racing. Every encounter with David felt riskier than the last, but she couldn't seem to stop herself. There was something intoxicating about their affair, a thrill that her life with Michael lacked. As the elevator descended, Emily forced herself to adopt a neutral expression. When she stepped into the lobby, she walked briskly past the receptionist, her heels clicking against the tile floor. She thought she'd made it out undetected, but as she exited the building, Sarah watched her from a corner of the lobby, her eyes narrowing. Sarah's suspicions had been growing for weeks, and now she had proof that something wasn't right. That evening, Michael returned home exhausted but satisfied. His presentation had gone well, and David had even complimented him on his thoroughness. Emily greeted him with her usual warmth, kissing his cheek as he set down his briefcase. "How was your day?" she asked, handing him a glass of water. "Busy, but good," Michael said, sinking onto the couch. David seemed impressed. Emily smiled, but her heart raced at the mention of David's name. "That's great," she said. "I'm proud of you." As Michael recounted his day, Emily forced herself to listen, but her mind kept drifting back to the events of the morning. She pushed the thoughts aside, determined to maintain the illusion of normalcy. But deep down, she knew it was only a matter of time before the cracks in her carefully constructed facade began to show. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Emily had always been attentive, but lately, there was a subtle shift in her behavior. She'd become distracted, checking her phone more often and dressing a bit more formally than usual, even for their morning walks to his office. At first, Michael chalked it up to a phase. Everyone had ups and downs, he reasoned. But the gnawing doubt in the back of his mind refused to go away. His colleagues' comments only added fuel to the fire. It started with Sarah. During a break in the office lounge, she casually brought up Emily. "Your wife, she's really supportive, isn't she?" Sarah asked, sipping her coffee. Michael smiled. "Yeah, she's amazing. Always has my back." Sarah hesitated, her expression unreadable. "That's nice. You're lucky to have her." There was an odd tone to her voice, but before Michael could question it, she excused herself, leaving him alone with his thoughts. At home, Emily's behavior became harder to ignore. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching TV, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it quickly and then set it face down on the coffee table. Michael noticed her tense shoulders and the way she avoided his gaze. "Who was that?" he asked casually. "Oh, just Laura," Emily replied, naming her friend from yoga class. "She's asking about our weekend plans." Michael nodded, but something didn't sit right. Emily had always been transparent about her friendships, but now there was an air of secrecy. He decided to let it go for the moment, not wanting to seem paranoid. The next morning, their usual walk to the office was interrupted by a brief encounter with David Dawson. As they approached the building, David stepped outside, his phone pressed to his ear. When he saw them, he ended the call abruptly, flashing a smile. "Michael, Emily," David greeted warmly. "Another beautiful morning, isn't it?" "Sure is," Michael replied, shaking his boss's hand. Emily's smile was a touch too bright, her voice overly enthusiastic as she said, "Good morning, Mr. Dawson." David's eyes lingered on Emily a moment longer than necessary, and Michael's stomach tightened. He dismissed the thought, chalking it up to his imagination. But as they walked inside, he couldn't help but notice the faint blush on Emily's cheeks. Later that day, Sarah's cryptic behavior continued. She stopped by Michael's desk, her expression guarded. "Hey, do you have a second?" she asked. "Sure. What's up?" Michael replied. Sarah hesitated, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Just keep an eye on things. Sometimes people aren't who they seem." Michael frowned. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," Sarah said quickly. "Forget I said anything." She walked away before he could press her further. The unease that had been simmering inside him now felt like a full-blown storm. At home, Michael decided to test his instincts. While Emily was in the shower, he picked up her phone from the nightstand. He didn't intend to snoop, but curiosity got the better of him. He tried to unlock it, only to find that the passcode had been changed. "That's odd," he muttered to himself. Emily had always shared her passcode with him. Why change it now? When Emily returned, he casually asked, "Hey, did you change your phone passcode?" She froze for a split second before recovering. Oh, yeah. I read an article about security risks and thought it was a good idea. Do you need it? Michael forced a smile. No, just curious. Her explanation was plausible, but the timing felt too convenient. He decided not to push the issue, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. A few days later, Michael arrived at work early to prepare for a team meeting. As he walked through the lobby, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. Emily was stepping out of the elevator. She glanced around nervously before heading toward the exit. Emily? Michael called out. She turned, startled. Michael! What are you doing here so early? I could ask you the same thing, he said, his tone light but questioning. Oh, I just dropped off some paperwork for Laura. She asked me to swing by since I was in the area, Emily said quickly. Michael nodded slowly, though her explanation didn't fully make sense. He watched as she left, her hurried steps betraying her nervousness. The incident stayed with him throughout the day. He couldn't shake the image of Emily's startled expression or the way she'd rushed to leave. When he mentioned it to Sarah later, she gave him a pointed look. You should trust your instincts, she said quietly. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. Michael's chest tightened. He didn't want to believe that Emily could be hiding something from him, but the evidence was starting to pile up. He resolved to get to the bottom of it, no matter what it took. Michael's unease had reached a boiling point. The inconsistencies in Emily's behavior and Sarah's cryptic warnings gnawed at him, leaving him restless and distracted. He couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong, and he was determined to uncover the truth. The following morning, Michael pretended everything was normal as he and Emily walked to the office. He kept up their usual small talk, though his mind was elsewhere, strategizing his next move. You've been quiet, Emily said, giving him a sidelong glance. Just thinking about the presentation I have later, Michael replied smoothly. Emily nodded, her smile strained. She seemed relieved when they arrived at the building, giving him a quick kiss on the cheek before turning to leave. But instead of heading upstairs, Michael lingered in the lobby, watching her through the glass doors. Just as he suspected, Emily didn't walk home. Instead, she slipped back inside and took the elevator. Michael's heart sank, but his resolve hardened. He had to know where she was going. Michael's chance came that afternoon when a coworker mentioned that security footage from the building's cameras was accessible for employees working on internal reports. It wasn't strictly ethical, but Michael figured his suspicions justified a little rule-bending. That evening, long after most employees had left, Michael stayed behind and accessed the footage. He fast-forwarded through hours of video until he found what he was looking for, Emily entering the building after their morning walk and heading straight to the elevator that led to the executive floor. His stomach twisted as he watched her step out and disappear down the hall toward David's office. Michael couldn't sleep that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the footage in his mind. Emily had lied to him, and he couldn't ignore the implications. The next day, he decided to confront Sarah, hoping she could shed some light on the situation. Sarah, Michael said, catching her in the break room. Can we talk? She hesitated but nodded. Sure. What's on your mind? Michael glanced around to make sure they were alone. I need to know what's going on with David. And Emily. Sarah's expression darkened. I was wondering when you'd ask, she said. Look, I don't have concrete proof, but I've seen things. Emily's been up on the executive floor a lot lately, and David, he has a reputation. A reputation for what? Michael asked, his voice tight. Sarah hesitated again. For getting involved with people he shouldn't. Women, specifically. It's not the first time he's blurred the lines with an employee's spouse. Michael's blood ran cold. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't know how you'd react, Sarah said softly. And I wasn't sure if it was my place. But you deserve to know. The next morning, Michael devised a plan. He told Emily he had an early meeting and left the house an hour before his usual time. But instead of heading to work, he parked his car a block away from the office and waited. Sure enough, Emily arrived shortly after, walking briskly toward the building. Michael followed at a safe distance, his heart pounding in his chest. He watched as she slipped inside and took the elevator to the executive floor. Michael's hands clenched into fists. He couldn't confront her yet, he needed more. Determined to gather definitive evidence, he reached out to Sarah for help. "Can you keep an eye on David's office today?" he asked over the phone. "Let me know if you see anything unusual." Sarah agreed, and Michael spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, though his mind was elsewhere. That evening, Sarah called him with an update. "I saw her," Sarah said. "She was in his office for over an hour. Whatever's going on, it's not innocent." That night, Michael confronted Emily. He waited until after dinner when they were sitting in the living room. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but firm. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." Emily's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Of course. What is it? Why have you been going to David's office?" Michael asked, watching her reaction closely. Emily froze, her face paling. "What are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me," Michael said, his voice rising. "I've seen the footage. I know you've been going to his office after you dropped me off. What's going on?" Emily's lips parted, but no words came out. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. "Answer me," Michael demanded. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," Michael said, his anger boiling over. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything more. Michael stood, his chest heaving. "I deserve the truth, Emily. If you won't tell me, I'll find it out on my own." As he left the room, Emily buried her face in her hands, her sobs echoing through the house. Michael's resolve only deepened. Whatever secrets Emily was hiding, he was determined to uncover them. Michael's suspicions had crystallized into certainty. Emily's evasiveness, Sarah's warnings, and the damning footage all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. But despite everything he'd uncovered, Michael knew he needed undeniable proof before taking the final step. The next morning, Michael put his plan into action. He told Emily he had to leave early for an off-site meeting, but instead of going to work, he parked his car a few blocks away from the office and waited. When Emily arrived, he watched as she walked into the building, her steps quick and deliberate. Michael followed her inside, staying far enough behind to avoid detection. He took the stairs to the executive floor, arriving just in time to see Emily disappear into David's office. Michael's heart pounded as he crept closer, stopping just outside the door. He could hear faint voices, but couldn't make out the words. Suddenly, the voices grew louder. Michael pressed himself against the wall as the door opened and Sarah stepped out, her face flushed with anger. She stopped short when she saw Michael, her eyes narrowing. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice low. "I could ask you the same thing," Michael replied. "What's going on in there?" Sarah hesitated, then sighed. "You're about to find out." She stepped aside, motioning for Michael to enter. Michael pushed the door open, his stomach twisting as he stepped inside. Emily and David were standing close together, their expressions a mix of shock and guilt. Emily's face turned pale as she saw Michael, while David's usual confidence faltered. "Michael," Emily stammered, taking a step back. "I can explain." "Save it," Michael snapped, his voice cold. He turned to David, his fists clenched. "How long has this been going on?" David raised his hands defensively. "Now, let's not jump to conclusions." Michael's anger boiled over. "Don't patronize me. I've seen the footage. I know she's been coming here. So I'll ask you again, how long?" Emily's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "A few months." The room fell silent, the weight of her admission hanging in the air. Michael felt as if the ground had been pulled out from beneath him. He turned to Emily, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and heartbreak. Why? He asked. Why would you do this to me? Emily's tears spilled over as she struggled to find the words. I don't know. It just happened. I didn't mean to hurt you. Michael shook his head, his jaw tightening. You didn't mean to hurt me? You've been lying to me for months. Sneaking around behind my back. How could you not mean to hurt me? Sarah cleared her throat, drawing their attention. Sorry to interrupt, but I think you both deserve to know the truth about David. David's expression darkened. Sarah, don't. Oh, I think I will, Sarah said, her tone sharp. Michael, you're not the first person David's done this to. He has a pattern of preying on employees and their spouses. Emily isn't the first, and she won't be the last. Emily's head snapped up. What? It's true, Sarah said. He's been doing this for years. And every time, he manipulates people into thinking it's their fault. That they're the ones who crossed the line. Don't let him fool you. David's face twisted with anger. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Sarah shot back. I've seen it happen too many times. You've ruined more lives than I can count. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences. Michael turned back to Emily, his expression hard. Is that true? Did he manipulate you? Emily hesitated, then nodded. At first, yes. But I didn't stop it. I let it happen. Michael's heart broke at her admission. He turned to David, his voice filled with quiet fury. You're a disgrace. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. David's confidence wavered, but he quickly regained his composure. You can try, but this company doesn't run without me. No one will believe you. Sarah stepped forward, a determined glint in her eye. That's where you're wrong. I have enough evidence to bring you down. And I'm not afraid to use it. David's face turned ashen as Sarah pulled out a folder filled with documents. Michael felt a spark of hope amidst the wreckage of his emotions. For the first time, he saw a path to justice. The confrontation ended with David storming out of the office, his threats ringing hollow in the face of Sarah's resolve. Michael turned to Emily, his heart heavy. I need time to think, he said quietly. I don't know if I can forgive you. But I know I can't stay here right now. Emily nodded, her tears flowing freely. I understand. I'm so sorry, Michael. For everything. Michael left without another word, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. But as he stepped into the cool evening air, he felt a glimmer of hope. The truth had come to light, and for the first time in weeks, he felt free. Michael sat alone in his apartment, the silence pressing down on him like a weight. The events of the past few days replayed endlessly in his mind, Emily's betrayal, David's smug arrogance, Sarah's revelation. The life he thought he knew had been shattered, leaving him to pick up the pieces. Meanwhile, Emily was at home, grappling with her own guilt and regret. She had tried calling Michael multiple times, leaving voicemails filled with apologies and pleas for forgiveness. But Michael hadn't answered. He needed space to process everything, and Emily's words felt hollow in the face of what she'd done. At work, the fallout from the confrontation was swift. Sarah had taken her evidence to the company's board of directors, exposing David's history of manipulation and unethical behavior. The board acted quickly, suspending David pending a full investigation. The once mighty CEO was now a pariah, his reputation in ruins. Michael found some solace in knowing that justice was being served. But the victory felt hollow. The damage to his marriage and his trust in Emily overshadowed any sense of triumph. A week later, Emily showed up at Michael's apartment. He hesitated before opening the door, his heart pounding as he faced her for the first time since their confrontation. Michael, Emily began, her voice trembling. I know I'm the last person you want to see right now. But I need to say this in person. Michael crossed his arms, his expression guarded. Go ahead. Emily took a deep breath. I'm so sorry for what I did. I betrayed your trust, and there's no excuse for that. But I want to try to fix this. If you'll let me. Michael's jaw tightened. Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed the foundation of everything we built together. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I know. And I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Counseling, therapy, anything. Please, Michael. Don't give up on us. Michael looked away, his emotions a storm of anger, sadness, and lingering love. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said quietly. But I'll think about it. Emily nodded, her relief palpable. That's all I'm asking for. Thank you. Over the next few weeks, Michael and Emily began attending couples counseling. The sessions were painful but necessary, forcing them to confront the deeper issues in their marriage. Michael learned to voice his feelings more openly, while Emily faced the full weight of her actions and the damage they had caused. Slowly, they began to rebuild. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when Michael wondered if it was worth it. But Emily's commitment to earning back his trust gave him hope that they might have a chance. At work, Michael's life took an unexpected turn. With David gone, the board offered Michael a promotion to oversee the department. Though he hesitated at first, he ultimately accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to start fresh. Sarah, too, found herself in a new role, her courage in exposing David earning her respect among her peers. She and Michael developed a friendship built on mutual respect, their shared experience creating a bond that helped them both move forward. Months later, Michael and Emily sat on their couch, sharing a quiet moment after a long day. The scars of their ordeal were still there, but they were healing. Michael reached for Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. We've come a long way, he said. Emily nodded, her eyes glistening. You'll never stop trying to make up for what I did. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Michael managed a small smile. It's not just for you. It's for us. And I think we might be worth it. Though the road ahead was still uncertain, Michael and Emily faced it together, determined to build a stronger, more honest relationship. The betrayal had changed them, but it hadn't defined them. And in the end, that was enough.